I was asked to give a critique, I suppose, of the McDonagh Junction shopping centre in Kilkenny. I was conservation officer at the time. It went through the planning process about 7 years ago now. It's open about 3. As an architect, I think I had an urban design hat as much as a conservation hat, so there's a lot of that in it. I might be the sacrificial. I think there's a phrase, every party needs a good hanging or something like that, but some of the planning policies that a shopping centre is founded on will run counter to Connor's comments earlier. I also touch on, I suppose, what David mentioned, which I think is very interesting, is private management of the public realm, which of course the shopping centre is. And whereas I think before I might have thought that wasn't a good thing. In fact, cooperation between public and private in the public realm seems to me to be the way forward. So I've titled it Conservation and Development in the sense that we want both. So therefore that suggests we're going to have to balance different objectives. Those objectives I see as land use objectives, urban design objectives, conservation objectives, mainly from the planning authority viewpoint. And for a developer, of course, economic viability. The contribution of historic structures in this case was the 1841 Union Workhouse and the redundant railway buildings from the 1850s. These now provide accommodation for new uses, mainly retail, and I think more importantly, they provide the backdrop to new public spaces. I've no axe to grind one way or the other. I wasn't on the design team in any way. I was with the local authority at the time, so it's a kind of a warts and all account of how it's worked out. You may be in part enthused or in part offended by some of what was done. McDonagh Junction refers to the fact that Kilkenny is a spur off the Waterford to Dublin rail line, and Tomás McDonagh was, of course, one of the 1916 rebels. He was executed, but he had been a teacher in Kilkenny, in St. Kieran's College. Now, just to put us in context, this is the street map of Kilkenny. I highlighted in orange there the retail core, which is essentially the high street, the medieval town, whereas McDonagh Junction is up here at the top of John Street. Retail is along the high street in a fairly linear pattern, and you cross the bridge, you go up to the railway station up along John Street, which is the way out to Dublin. So what's wrong with that? That's all the way it's always been. But the planning strategy is to create more of a loop and to, I suppose, complete the two linear walks with something that connects across the top there. So McDonagh Junction, highlighted with the yellow oval circle, is seen as a key thing at the top of John Street to draw people along. And then the black arrow here I've shown is a new road, now just approved by Bord Pleanála, which will allow this loop to be completed. It will open up the Smithwick's Brewery site there, which is earmarked for closure, and also the livestock mart site up there. The marts have moved to the edge of town. Now, there's been quite a polarised reaction to the new road proposal. It's changing, as it were, the medieval street pattern of the town, but that's the strategy to extend the retail offer of the town. And there's a sort of an inner wheel strategy involving a new footbridge over the river. Thanks. And a sort of cultural quarter based on County Hall, the Evans Asylum as the Butler Art Gallery, and a new library. Now, this is Kilkenny in the 1842 map. See the castle at the bottom there, and up at the top in the open fields is before the railway arrived, the site, and there is the Union Workhouse up at the top. Now the workhouse is a very efficient machine, I always thought, for dealing with the destitute. You arrived at the front there, up at the top. Families were split up. You came down the centre if you were admitted. Women one side, men the other in dormitories. There was a woman's yard, girls' yard, men's yard, boys' yard. A child of two, a male child of two, would be taken and sent over to the men's side. At the back is the infirmary. The 4 yards there were for lunatics, idiots, asylums, lunatics, idiots, and imbeciles. And there's a 4th one at the very end, and there's the morgue. There were 2 basic types. Kilkenny was the larger one here, which had the 3-storey dormitory blocks. The men's yard here. There were about 136 workhouses built very quickly. A lot of the Kilkenny one was gone. Government offices were built in the 90s, I think, and it took out most of this side of it. And in fact, the developer of McDonagh is very sort of, likes to comment about how they've done such a good job with their piece, whereas the state blithely demolished a lot of it not so very long ago. During the course of the construction, there was a unrecorded mass burial discovered with 970 bodies. So the social significance of this site is, of course, very, very big. And there's a small memorial to the dead, and they're reinterred within the centre. The other buildings of significance were the railway buildings here in orange, the goods shed and the old terminus. The line used to continue through to Castlecomer to the coal mines, but that has stopped. So there is the old terminus. You can imagine that the tracks used to span across the road there and continue. To the right of that, you see the old redundant platform and screen wall. This will become phase 2 of the development, hopefully. It used to be that because Kilkenny was a spur, your train came into Kilkenny off the main line, the engine had to decouple and come around, and there was a run of tracks needed for that, which are now redundant, and they have passed to the ownership of the shopping centre. But the economic climate at the moment will not see phase 2 happen immediately, but hopefully it will do so. There's the goods shed from the 1850s within the scheme. Now, I mentioned balancing objectives. Well, what are they? Land use objectives. The planning authority's desire for a genuinely mixed-use development, balanced against the residential amenity concerns, because there is a housing element to this. Urban design objectives, a desire to gain new public spaces suitable for a variety of events. And I put in events there because I think we can have good design and good spaces created, but if there isn't something going on in them, they'll still remain fairly dead and sterile. So there's an art to making things happen in these places. And certainly in the UK, it would be normal for a town to have a town centre manager whose very job it is to organise things like that in the best places. Now, orientation and shelter are the crucial factors there, as we'll see. Conservation objectives, respect for the character of the structures and their setting, hopefully, but balance that against this is to be a new place for people to live, people to work and to shop. In terms of viability for a developer, well, that's obvious, but I put in there security and control. At the end of the whole process, what became apparent was that going into the future, the owner needs to be able to control this place. I suppose he wants to lock it up and go home to bed at night and sleep easy. Whereas for the planners, the sacred cow of permeability and people being able to wander at will all over the place is attractive, but that is anathema really to something like a shopping centre developer. If you can make out there, in green is what was left of the workhouse. The government offices are behind it there, and also the goods shed. The centre it wraps itself around these buildings, and the two main spaces are formed by the historic structures. Phase 2 will involve taking over the redundant tracks and aligning the goods shed on axis with St John's Church, which is across the street. And you will have then an axial entrance into the shopping centre, which it doesn't have at the moment, which will be a much better thing, and open up Goods Shed Square to better effect as well. Now let's go in. This is the vehicular entrance off the Dublin Road. You go under the live tracks. There are 2 decks of underground car parking. As a pedestrian, having come up John Street from the city centre, you can go under the now redundant tracks, passing the terminal there, the old terminal on the left, which is now in retail use and office above. And phase 2 will be here on the right. Now, Goods Shed Square is flanked by these 2 drums of apartment buildings, and it is the backdrop to what's termed Goods Shed Square. Now, I think this is a very good space. The orientation, as you can see there, is southerly. I think it'll be very suitable for a variety of activities. It's to be complemented in due course by a cinema and a cinema and a hotel. Cinema and a hotel, which will incorporate the other arches to match these of the old railway platform wall. Now, what's in here? Well, there's about a dozen tiny little shops, and there's a branch office of the local credit union. It's probably that €50 per week floor space that was mentioned. You never know what's in there week to week. I got a voucher you can get your feet nibbled by fish. They were at the one end of it a few months ago, but they might be gone now. There's that type of turnover there all the time, which I suppose is symptomatic of people starting and failing perhaps, or starting and moving on to more conventional space. But it's functioning well, I think, for that type of function. The space, I think, is lovely. Whether it'll be used for concerts, markets or whatever, it's up for that. The management say there isn't a great profit in it yet, but they will temper anything with, again, the immunity concerns of residents who look down on it from above. So moving in, the impact. Now the impact of the development, well, if you can imagine the trains used to come in at ground level there, but they loaded and unloaded at the level of the top of that new plinth. So the main impact on the goods shed is that the floor has been dropped by about 1,200 millimetres, and therefore the proportions of that glazed opening would be elongated. The plinth is new. The lighter colour there are granite jambs to the sides of an otherwise brick arch to take the knocks of goods in and out off the train historically. So I think the impact has been fairly modest compared to the benefits gained. Now, when you go behind the goods shed, you enter the shopping mall. It's a conventional double-sided mall with the big multiple retailers. TK Maxx is at one end, Dunnes Stores is at the other. You can see these circular light vents in the ceiling of the mall. We'll see those from the top later on. When you come down the mall, you crank to the left, and on axis with the escalators coming up from the underground car parks, you enter what's termed Goods or Workhouse Square. Now, this is the old men's yard of the workhouse. It's now the focal point of the shopping centre. It contains 4 restaurants, start-up business space. I should have said that the county council maintain an equity in this development. In fact, I skipped forward a little bit too quickly. I should explain. The county council owned the workhouse. Ian Rod Aaron owned the station buildings. There was an integrated area plan adopted and a competition held. Now, the integrated area plan brought tax benefits to a developer. A company called Chesterbridge, with Reddy Associate Architects and David Slattery, won that competition. They had been active in Drogheda and here in Dublin Docklands. The county council have, I think, a 5% stake in the finished scheme. The borough council were the planning authority, and I think that was good, because inevitably a shopping centre, it was appealed. There was an oral hearing, determination by Bord Pleanála. There was objections from the high street traders, from Ossory Park residents nearby, from the rival Mart site developer. Anyway, the county council still has office floor space. I'll show it to you in a moment in here for start-up business. The history of the place is on a small permanent display there on the left. There's the gables of the 3-storey former dormitory block, men's block of the workhouse. Now, it's undercover. That was somewhat contentious. I'll come back to that at the end. But it does work very well, this space. It's all weather, all year round use. It's a fairly jolly kind of place. It's a nice size, and there's generally something going on there, most weekends or every other day. All sorts of community groups have little events and so on. I think it's been quite successful. Now, what about the impact on the workhouse? Well, I have to say it's been huge. If you can recall, the workhouse had a 3-storey dormitory building. It had single-storey work sheds, dining room and chapel. It had a 2-storey infirmary block. But what we have here is a level eaves line for a new symmetrically structured glass roof. So what we're looking at there, for instance, is properly restored wall of the old chapel, the windows put back to the correct profiles and configurations and so on. But the complete upper floor there is new. The architecture is nice, the detailing is crisp, but the restoration of that roof vent, including the lovely scalloped leadwork and so on, is maybe a little bit Disney-esque in the sense that it now sits 3 metres higher than it ever did historically. When we come around the return leg of the mall to Dunstores, I think the impact on the workhouse is severe. You can't see the roof anymore. These were the yards I mentioned for lunatics, imbeciles, asylums, where they were quarantined. It's now a covered shopping mall. Again, the windows, the limestone has been properly restored, although it didn't work for retail, and later permission was granted for these type of plant-on display cabinets, I suppose you'd call them, whereby the people who have the shops behind the sash and case windows put stuff out there and try to grab your attention. So I think there's a clear divide there, that there was an urban design gain in the men's yard. It's a good space, it works well. I think there's been a huge change to the setting, obviously, of the workhouse itself. 970 people died here. Ironically, maybe at the same time that they were building the goods shed, only 50 metres away. I don't know if a memorial out the front is adequate acknowledgement of that, and you're now sipping your coffee in the old men's yard. Now, one conference theme was a place to live, and there was a comment earlier about living over the shop. Well, this is living over the shop, modern style, I suppose. The box there is the back of Dunnes Stores, the service side, and there are 114 apartments up on the roof of this shopping mall. Now, living over the shop traditionally was, I suppose, that you overlooked the street, you added to the bustle of what was going on in a popular urban village, the likes of Ranelagh and these places are often cited. Well, this is living over the shop in terms of the shopping centre. There's a very interesting mix of house types. There's two-storey, there's duplex, there's apartments. These objects are what I showed you earlier, the vents and light wells down to the shopping mall underneath. There's open space. But there's something, I suppose, a little bit surreal about it, I think. It's a world of its own up there. It isn't really part of the overall scheme. It's a separate management company. It's mainly buy-to-let type properties. In fact, the developers retained half of them and had a fire sale of the other half at quite low prices. But occupancy is quite high. Now, to wrap up, I want to just talk about the issue of public realm. Once the overall design concept was accepted, issues of most concern to the developer side were control and management of the finished product. So Goodshed Square is 24-hour open public space. It's a fine plaza, but it's on private land, and the management do reserve the right to close this space if they had to. It's possible to do so. I think it'll function very well as public realm, but it does sit on top of a bowling alley. Workhouse Square, is that public realm or is it private? Well, this is the debate. It's pretty much available to the community to have events in it. The local orchestra or immigrant groups and so on, they all have little events going on there on and off. But should it have been public? Should it have been covered? It was possible to do so. The men's yard is accessible from the Hebron Road. In fact, entrance to the apartments is off this lane, partly. What you see there is the end of the lane is secured by the glazed wall of the Workhouse Square, and there's the glazed roof. It could have been possible to have that open. The county council would have probably liked it to be, because they occupy that new first floor over the workhouse where there are small start-up business floor space, and they could have come and gone independently of the shopping centre. But management issues are in place, or arrangements are in place rather. From an urban design perspective, I think it was right to cover it. The orientation was not as good as Workhouse Square. It wouldn't really have functioned well all year round by any means. So I think, on balance, this private management of this particular piece of public realm is the best outcome. Actually, just as an aside, I was in Limerick last week, and the milk market struck me as being similar. Historic courtyard development, but it's had a new permanent tented structure put up, and I believe the popularity of the place has come up a lot. But it is, again, a secure place at night. You lock those doors and go home. So finally, they say the little things can trip you up. I do recall the big debate about Workhouse Square at the time. This is a dense development, and We hadn't ever in Kilkenny had apartments on top of a shopping centre before. But because it was at the railway station, it was considered a runner. Now, the development plan says a maximum plot ratio in the city centre of 2. And this was very debatable. Was this even city centre? It's a good way up the top of John Street from the High Street. When the design was done first, Workhouse Square was open. And I think the plot ratio of the overall scheme was 1.99, something like that. When you covered it over, it was maybe 2.01. So this caused, it doesn't sound like much of an issue, but everyone knew this was going to Bortanola. Material contravention is a term that strikes a stake through the heart of a developer. He did not want to go to appeal with a plot ratio that was 2 point anything. It was fudged, and the way out for the planner, I recall, was that there is a shared railway station car park which is open air. And between some kind of clever formula about how many spaces were for the commuter getting the train and how many for the shopping centre, let's just say the figure was massaged, and we could hold up our hands and say this is not a material contravention of the shopping centre, but or of the development plan rather. But I think there are things like that where planning objectives need to have a bit of discretion, or everyone can get themselves in a corner for something that you might all want. And the other thing is, I would say, on development charges. I don't think it was an issue here, but I've had a recent case where similar, an arena for prancing horses that people could look at, potentially buy horses. It was proposed to cover it like this for just shelter, and again, development contribution scheme, full whack, commercial floor space, big area, big development charge, as much as the cost of covering the space. So another thing, discretion in schemes like that is really needed. So to sum up, I think two good and very different public spaces have been created at McDonagh Junction, which between them are well suited to hosting a wide range of activities. Undoubtedly, it's the goods shed and the workhouse that bring character to these spaces. The patina of age and the close grain of brick and masonry construction is a wonderful counterfoil to the big architecture of the Mall and the anchor stores. Do the historic structures attract people to McDonagh? Well, I don't know. Maybe not in any overt sense. But I think designing the development around the old buildings makes the place very memorable. And the type of accommodation provided means that the big multiples are counterbalanced by the small startups, and I find that attractive. It's a hybrid development for sure, but it's certainly a part of Kilkenny now, and I do hope that phase 2 will happen. Thanks.